Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Learning and Families Committee. I'll just move straight into asking Andy, our clerk, about substitutes, please.
Here we've got. Right. Got apologies from Councillor Carr with Councillor Mayer substituting for him, and apologies from Councillor Massey with Councillor Harvey substituting for him.
Thank you, Andy. Any declarations of interest from members, please? If there are none, we will move on to approving the minutes. Just before we do that, I think we do have a wee change to a bit of the 3.1 minute from our last committee. Andy, please.
Yeah, then there's a correction to the minute. Robert Stubbs was recorded as not attending, but he was actually attending online.
Apologies, Robert, if you're here today. Humble apologies about that, but we will change that accordingly. Notwithstanding that, can we approve all the 4 minutes there that are listed on the agenda, or other matters arising? Agreed. Thank you very much. We will move straight on, therefore, to item 4, which is our PKC Education Improvement Plan, and I'm going to ask our strategic lead, David McCluskey, to introduce this.
Thank you very much, Convener. So this report represents the Education and Learning Standards and Quality Report for 2024-2025 and introduces the Annual Education Service Improvement Plan for 2025-26. It provides a broad and balanced view of service performance over the past year against performance targets and updates and priority actions identified in last year's Education Improvement Plan. The format's been changed this year to reflect the updated National Improvement Framework priorities. This has been really helpful in enabling us to focus on areas which in the past may not have featured quite so explicitly in terms of performance reporting. The report highlights areas of success as well as those areas where progress has been limited or where targets have not been met, which remain a focus for our work across the education and learning service. We've also set out our plans for 25-26 under our 3 key priorities of learning, teaching and curriculum, inclusive practice, additional support needs, transformation and leadership of change. Improving outcomes for children and young people remains the core business of education and learning. I'm privileged to work alongside colleagues who demonstrate commitment, creativity, perseverance and resilience in delivering services, and extend my sincere thanks to each and every member of our teams, the young people and the families that we work with for how they support us in this work. We're here today to answer any questions that arise from the plan, and we're joined by a range of officers as well, so we'll be able to give some more detailed information on that plan. And a special welcome to Eve Moran, who's joined us as Quality Improvement Manager on Monday of last week as one of our key team. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, David. I'd just like to also extend my welcome, Eve. Questions, please. Councillor Sayers, it's just come through. I'll come to you next, but Councillor McPherson.
Oh, thank you, Convener. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Convener. It was just a bit of clarification, really, regarding. It's from page onwards about the stretch aims and their targets. It says in the report that they're locally set. And I was just wondering if, I presume that's the stretch aims is a national standard and the targets are locally set for each local authority, are they?
Yes, absolutely. National Scottish Government will set for the Education Scotland set a set of core stretch aims that we have to report against, but how we set those targets is done locally. Additional to that, there are what we call Stretch Plus aims, which are locally set. So we'll pick some indicators that are really important to us and we'll report on them. For example, we've got a range of indicators around about looked after care experience to children and young people. So they're not set nationally, they're part of our own local target set along with some of the other bits and bobs that are there. But the amount that we actually, the stretch and target that we set comes from us, and we've discussions with colleagues in Education Scotland round about that.
Thank you. That was my sort of a follow-up question. So those targets are they're set by officers and then they're approved by Education Scotland, or is it the other way around? Thank you.
No, the targets are set by officers, and I suppose I mean officers in the widest sense in terms of the totality of the kind of learning and teaching community here in Perth and Kinross, and then that's discussed with the officers from Education Scotland to ensure there's sufficient ambition in those targets.
Thanks, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Duff will try and get somebody to read. In the meantime, just wave at me and we'll bring you in. Councillor Shires, have you got lots of questions?
A few, but my first is really a point, not a question.
Okay.
In welcoming Eve to the meeting, I wondered if we would be able to have a new kind of who's who and what you do, because obviously there's been quite a lot of changes in the service. That would be really helpful to know who to direct things to.
I'd be very happy to do that, Councillor Shires, and I suppose apologies to the committee for not having provided that already, but I'll circulate a PowerPoint showing our new organisational structure after the meeting.
Thanks both. Carry on with questions,
Okay,
Councillor Shires, please.
My actual question is quite a straightforward one, and that is that 2.2 in the recommendations, it says request that the Strategic Lead Education Learning submit the plan to the Scottish Government by and then the date. And it was just a query about what happens to it then. Do they all go into some kind of Scottish Government sausage machine, and then out of that comes some kind of assessment of where we are within the national picture, or what happens?
Eve, debut answer, please, if that's okay.
Yeah, certainly. I've got a defective one. Thank you, folks. So before I joined, I was the attainment advisor for the Scottish Government. So I can give you, the Scottish Government will collect them in and have a look through. There's usually an officer that will then meet up with us back in the Education Service and give a bit of feedback around those, is what happens to them. Internally, they're used to collate patterns across national patterns that are then fed into briefings and things to ministers, just as you would get your reports here. But we do actually get some feedback, usually from a senior regional advisor or a national improvement officer.
Thank you, Eve. It's really nice having that bit inside information. And it was always sod's law that the first time you tried to answer a question, the microphone wasn't going to work. Sorry about that. Councillor Shires, is that?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Just that understanding and clarity about, because obviously there's so much measuring of what we do against other authorities, and so it was just generally a point of interest.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Councillor Shires. Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you, convener. I must admit, I found the layout of this report quite confusing, because we've got the main bit, the intro at the beginning, and then we've got Appendix 1, which is the review of 24-25, and it's numbered up internally up to number 2037, but the heading in the top right is Education Improvement Plan 25-26, and then we've got Appendix 2, which the numbering starts again. So are both of those going to the Scottish Government?
So the entirety of the document will go to Scottish Government, but I wonder if I could ask Rona Munro, who was the author of the report, really, because the report was pulled together following feedback we received at committee, but we're always looking to receive feedback, I think, about how we can improve it moving ahead. But Rona can maybe talk to us about the journey in terms of the report writing.
So the feedback that we've had previously was that there needed to be clarification, or there needed to be clarity in terms of our actions and the performance against them. So we have the second document, which has all of the outcomes that we had put forward in our plan for 24-25, along with the progress that's been made towards achieving them. And then also within that document, we set out our plans for the year to come. The first document is essentially a report in narrative form, rather than looking at specific outcomes, but using the outcomes from the National Improvement Framework to structure it to kind of give a broader context around the activity that's taken place over the course of the year and the progress that's been made that's maybe not specifically related to the outcomes in the Education Improvement Plan, but is important for context.
Thanks, Rona. I actually quite liked the way the report was done, but I was also slightly confused around the numbering. So if there's a little bit of admin tidying up, Councillor Barrett will do that. But in a broad sense, I think the way the report was set out was really good, I think. But thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Duff. Okay, thanks, Councillor Duff. Councillor McPherson, I think you had another one. Please.
Thank you, Convener. My question is page 60, Appendix 2, School Self-Evaluation of Quality Indicators. I note from the table that there are four schools that haven't submitted the data. I just wondered what the reasons might be for that, and is there actually a deadline for the submission of that data? Thank you.
Yeah, so there is a deadline for submission of data, and that deadline's back in June. Of those four schools that hadn't submitted data, 2 have subsequently submitted their data, but that's not been included within the report. 2 are part of an ongoing process and discussion with all central officers. And I suppose in both circumstances, there's a number of operational reasons why they felt that they couldn't submit their data and indeed the reports in time in terms of making the deadline. So, you know, we aim to have Timmy's reports in front of elected members, so that has certainly been a conversation that's being had and has been had.
Thanks, Councillor McPherson. Bailey Hearn, please.
Thank you very much, and yeah, thank you for the report, which is quite comprehensive. My question is based on page 46, the second to last paragraph, with regards to the revised model for allocation of support staff for ASN, and I think it's also on pages 90 and 91 in the second document, Appendix 2. What is the revised model, and how do you then allocate support staff to ASN numbers when you're not necessarily going to know those numbers because of the problems we have with CALMS and the diagnosis of children with ASN, but also I'm taking it the school psychologist will do that, but not until that young person is actually in the school and then being identified within the classroom as requiring ASN. But then it's probably too late to then reallocate support staff to support the additional numbers that may have been identified by the school psychologist.
And that's obviously quite a broad question, so we might need a couple of shots at bringing a totality of an answer to you, Bailey Hearn. But I'm going to ask Fiona Mackay, first of all, to talk about the allocation, and then we might spread out from that.
So the allocation model, we've had an allocation model since 2021. This has been revised to look at whether it's is there any way of making it more nuanced to be able to most effectively meet the level of needs within schools? We know that the level of needs change. However, we do allocate out on a 3-year basis, so there will be change within schools during the course of the 3 years, but largely that levels itself out between those leaving to go on to secondary school or those going on to a post-school destination, and then others come in. How we allocate out pupil support assistance is we have that core allocation, which is done on the formula, and previously it was just compiled on clothing and footwear grant data, which helps us to understand deprivation, and the school roll, which looked purely at the size and number of pupils within the school. What following feedback and looking at the working of how that's been managed over the last 3 years, it's actually 4 years because we extended a year to allow us to do this work. We recognised that there was a requirement to also bring back some element of looking at the CMIS data, so that we were clear as to the number of young people within a school who have a child's plan, and a child's plan at level 2 or 3, so it's at additional level or enhanced level, not taking out the intensive support element of it, because there's a standard, a staffing standard that deals with that separately. So just looking at mainstream schools. So we've now got a formula which takes in deprivation, still based on footwear and clothing grant, takes in school roll so that we're aware of the changing size of schools, and also takes in the number of children with child's plans within the school. Now, you're right in that we will always have young people who will join a school who may not have been in the school at that time, so they wouldn't be counted in that number. So there will be schools will experience changing population over the course of 3 years. We also, to accommodate that, we hold back some hours which are allocated out on an annual basis to provide exceptional allocations which meet the needs of children where they come into a school and they've got a particularly high need that cannot be met from within the allocation that's their core. So that we retain that ability to be flexible and be able to be responsive to the level of needs within schools at any particular time.
Thank you, Fiona. Thanks, Bailey Hearn. I do think this question will be a really important one as we go on, but thanks for that comprehensive answer. I would like to add as well, if I may, I think we should commend the previous convener who did bring a paper to committee that meant that we didn't just allocate staff in a broad sense on numbers, but we did take into account additional support need and indeed deprivation, one which I was delighted to support, but nonetheless was brought forward by the previous convener. And I think it is worth noting that. Bailey Hearn.
Yeah, I'd just like to come back and thanks. That was a pretty comprehensive answer there, but you mentioned about children joining the school during the school year, but that doesn't account for children that they're not getting diagnosed. They're probably getting looked at by educational psychologists because of the CALM system at the moment, not doing individual diagnosis. I'm not quite sure how they get around doing a complex diagnosis, because you need a single diagnosis in order to get the complex. So I'm not quite sure how that works, but the educational psychologist is going to pick up, certainly in P1, possibly in P2 and P3, when conditions start to manifest themselves in a different way. And that will work all the way through the primary, all the way up to secondary. But those numbers will not necessarily be pupils going in, so that your pupil numbers won't change in a school, but your needs will change within that school.
Susie?
Yes, it's probably important to start with the recognition that additional support needs in Scotland has quite a wide definition and isn't reliant on diagnosis. And we have a staged approach to assessment and to intervention, which will at some stage likely involve the school's educational psychologists. But educational psychologists can't step into the realm of clinical diagnosis. They will support the school, the parents and others to be really clear on what the educational need is and what the steps are to ameliorate that. And we are experiencing rising demand as a result, and the lack of a clinical diagnostic system at the moment is acknowledged. But we are able to continue to focus on educational need, input into the child's planning system, and therefore the allocation system that Fiona has explained.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Cuthbert, please.
Thank you, convener. I'm really pleased to see the school self-evaluation of quality indicators included. I think it's fantastic. So thank you for that. I was slightly confused by the numbering because I'd have thought that excellent would be number one, but it's kind of upside down. But in terms of where we take this and how we use it, can you confirm whether we'll be putting additional resources, whether satisfactory or below, so that we actually can, I mean, this gives us an idea of where the problems are. Will we be focusing attention on these particular areas?
Yeah, so thanks, Councillor Cuthbert. The short answer is yes, and the long answer is probably too long for the time we have today. But this is the very existential heart of what we're looking to do in terms of our school improvement system. I think one of the things I would add is I was really pleased to see the number of quality indicators, particularly in our secondary sector, that have improved from satisfactory. That's really positive. And those are validated improvements as well. So, you know, we've had a good discussion about realism round about self-evaluation, and that took us to a place where we're now ready to recognise genuine improvement. I think that in front of the committee before, we've talked about our quality improvement framework and how we support schools on a basis of universal support, and more tailored support, and also more intensive support. We've been really clear here about, you know, satisfactory is not satisfactory for us in Perth and Kinross, that there's an expectation of good or better. It's easy to say that, and we can't wish things better than they are. All we can do is put the relevant level of support into schools who are experiencing satisfactory outcomes, or indeed have been sitting in a good outcome for a good period of time, because it's about the constant march of improvement for all of our schools. So that is part of the live conversation that goes on in terms of leadership development, you know, support for schools in terms of the implementation of that kind of improvement cycle, support round about data. You know, it was last minute today, really, because we're in a really good conversation with secondary leaders about how we can best use our data to generate improvement. You know, that area of attainment in particular is an area we all want to see greater improvement in. So we had a really good collegiate discussion round about that. We're in different places in that discussion as well. But the framework exists there as part of that kind of constant march forward. So I guess the short answer is yes. The long answer is that this is what exercises us all in the system day in, day out.
Thanks, David. I do think your suggestion to put the self-evaluation in the report is a really good one, and I welcome the fact that we've done that. I think it is the first step to you know, getting things right. Yeah, carry on.
I was just going to say, I think it'd be useful if you could have sort of a red-green indicator whether it's improved from last year, so you can see where they're coming through. So you can actually see that. I mean, I was really pleased to see the secondary starting to pick up, which is good. You can't tell from this report, so it'll be useful if we did something like that.
Noted. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Duff, I think, please, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Sharp.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I still have problems with my computer, but I've gone to my phone for the questions. My question is regarding outcome 4, which I think starts on page 38, and it's maybe just the way I'm reading some of the tables that appear in that section. There are tables which have 2 entries. One's about achievement in various things, but the other one's about poverty-related attainment gaps. And my perception is that we were trying to get that to be as low a number as possible. But in some of the tables, trying to pick one out particularly. So senior phase attainment on page 39, for instance, says poverty-related attainment gap. The performance in 22-23 was 17%. In 23-24 it was 19%, but the stretch aim for 23-24 is 24%. I would have thought the stretch aim would have been less than 17%, if you know what I mean. So I'm just trying to to work out just exactly why we went for 24% and not 14%, for instance.
So the real answer is we're outperforming our stretch in that particular one. I'm not saying we manage it with all of our stretch aims. And I suppose one of the conversations earlier on about stretch aims that came from Councillor McPherson was about the process of setting those. So we set stretch aims on a 3-year basis alongside our colleagues from Education Scotland. And I guess what I would say is if a stretch aim is meant to stretch us, we should never quite reach it. We should always be just shy of it because it should stretch us. And I think in full candour, we probably could have set far more ambitious stretch aims back in the beginning of this process round about outcomes like that in that particular one. There's certain areas in terms of our senior phase attainment whereby in terms of that national comparison between quintile 1 and quintile 5, we really quite significantly outperform the national picture. So national 5 passes is a good example, and our pass rate, the gap for us is about 7%. I think it's about 12%. That's a really good news story. So we've not always managed to reflect that. The story's a wee bit less happy with some other parts of our attainment picture where we find it tougher to close that poverty-related attainment gap. So I guess it's not to say that we're winning that war on every single front, but some places we are, and some places we're doing better than we thought we would to start off with.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Councillor Shires and then Councillor Cuthbert, please, and then last call for questions, I guess.
Thank you. My question's on page 30 of the report, and it's about workforce management planning and the recruitment issues that we've been experiencing. And it's kind of two-parter, so it references maths, computing and home economics have been particular of concern. Is that a national challenge? And if it is, do we know what the Scottish Government is doing about it? Which is partly why I asked the question about what happened to the reports. And the second part to that is it refers to rural areas. Now, Perth and Kinross is a rural council area, but there's rural and there's rural, and some, Kinloch Rannoch and parts of Highland Perthshire are very rural, but other parts are probably, I think it's actually referred to as accessible in rural nature. So I think there is actually that, it's probably how we sell ourselves in terms of recruitment. So I'd be quite interested to know what we're doing. I actually met a couple of council employees today who live in Glasgow and work up here and commute each day. So obviously it is doable. So it was around, so the two-parter, do we know if those top subject areas are national challenges? And if they are, do we know what the government's doing about it? And secondly, how we are dealing with the recruitment locally?
Thanks, Councillor Sayers. Just before I bring David in to answer it, and this is a really simplistic and crass comment, but I think it's relevant to it. It's really interesting when you sit in COSLA and the Central Belt equivalents moan about not being able to give enough teachers jobs, and some of the Highland councils are moaning about, moaning, that's not the right word, are expressing a difficulty in recruiting staff. So it does feel that there's a geographical imbalance here, but that's the really naive answer. The proper answer will come from David McCluskey.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think there are definitely national trends in terms of subject specificity for secondary here. So, nationally we find that we have an awful lot of PE teachers, for example, but nationally there's other subjects that we find that it's difficult to recruit for, or it's more challenging to recruit for. So we do end up as local authorities kind of fighting over that scarce market. If you like, Scottish Government through Education in Scotland are looking at, they're well aware of those challenges, and they're looking to try to expand recruitment in those areas in lots of different ways, engagement with tertiary education, that bit about making teaching an attractive career. I think in terms of I suppose what I'm more interested in is in terms of our own landscape here in Perth and Kinross. But there's a point to pick up, which is the point about the perception of rural. And there's schools which are remote and rural, but then there's an idea that some schools are rural, and we've certainly had some fantastic opportunities in some of our schools that have been at the kind of the Highland Perthshire ward, whereby we've worked really, really hard to publicise those great opportunities, and we've managed to attract really good people, but we have to work really hard. We're doing a wee bit of work with colleagues in other local authorities with those kind of much bigger expanses than we have about how they make it more attractive for people. Part of it is the reality, if you like, the Central Belt mentality of where we are in Perth and actually where Aberfeldy is in relation to that as an example. That's something we're working on. I think another thing is we're working closely with our colleagues in HR to say, I think, we've often pitched teaching vacancies here as come to Perth and Kinross, it's a great place to live. And of course it is. But I think what's a more productive way, or another productive vein that we should be mining, is come to work in Perth and Kinross and grow your leadership here. You will have opportunities for career development that you will not get elsewhere. You'll have a world-class system of career-long professional learning that you can tap into. You'll be supported from you arrive until you leave the local authority, hopefully upon your retirement. So we've really kind of pushed that lifelong learning part of the job, and the attraction of coming to work here compared to anywhere else has been intrinsic to the career itself, not just relying on the fantastic scenery and the fantastic locality that we work in. So, and we've had some, initial success round about that in terms of some fairly high-profile vacancies that we've managed to fill recently from central Scottish local authorities. It's ongoing work, I would say.
Thank you. 2 questions from Councillor Cuthbert and then a last question from Councillor Duff, please.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I think if you're trying to improve things, you're always best to look out to see best practice elsewhere. And I was wondering, do we sort of incorporate ideas from comparator authorities to see what they're doing and incorporate them in this, and should that be separately identified? Or
The short answer to that again is yes, and the work of ADES is crucial in helping us to do that. A piece of work that ADES have taken forward alongside Education in Scotland and Scottish Government is to split each of the local government benchmarking framework comparator groups in two. So from 8 you go into 4s and into quads. So we are linked with 3 other local authorities, which local government benchmarking framework tells us have similarities, and you might discuss because they feel quite different, some of them. We work closely with Eastern Bartonshire, Aberdeenshire and Orkney, and there's learning for us from all of those local authorities, and equally there's things that they can learn from us too. I think that we have good discussions, but what we're going to have round about the quad work is a piece of focused quality improvement. For our quad and the work that we're doing, we're jointly focusing on building leadership capacity. And I think we've had a lot of discussions here about leadership being one of the real keys to school improvement. And we're explicitly linking that to school improvement as well. So, were you to look at outcomes, attainment outcomes, there's a whole world of reasons why it might be, but Eastern Bartonshire are consistently one of the top 2 local authorities in Scotland. So it's a great opportunity for us to work alongside them and work with them to see what they're doing that we could learn from and that we could take on. Similarly, Aberdeenshire has the same challenges as we do in terms of locality, remoteness, rurality, perceived or real. Perhaps a little bit more so as well. So it's been a really great opportunity for us to look there. They've also developed a foundation apprenticeship model in terms of a curriculum model moving ahead in this year's plan. So that's, rather than those planned opportunities that I would have with fellow directors and chief education officers, it's a planned structured piece of work, which isn't in this year's documentation because the plan is only in draft at this stage, but will be part of of another appendix, I'm afraid to say, next year when the next report comes.
Yeah, my second question relates to iPads. I read recently that Fife are actually giving iPads to all their pupils to help them improve as part of their improvement. Are there any plans for something like that, or is the Scottish Government putting any money into that?
So yes, Fife Council did make that political budget decision, I suppose, round about iPads and what were happening. Myself and one of our colleagues who's lead for digital education have visited Fife to talk about how they're rolling that out. I think what's important for us at this stage is you'll have seen in the plan that we are looking to create a digital strategy moving ahead. I think we've been good in Perth and Kinross at doing a lot of digital activity focused around about learning and teaching, but there's been a need, and I think it was discussed in this chamber when we're looking at the mobile phone policy, to create something that was a more cohesive digital strategy, looking ahead to what we want to achieve. Today, the 2 colleagues that are leading in that are working with some executive coaching in terms of where do we want our strategic outcomes to be moving ahead. Now, there's a big gap between that and necessarily just each individual pupil having their own iPad that they can take home. So I don't want to kind of prejudge where we'll end up in that. But what I am clear about is if we're going to leverage the opportunities that are coming to us through digital learning and artificial intelligence, that's not a bus that any of us can stop. So we need to ensure that we're actually upstream of it and we have actually a structured strategic approach to what we're doing. And again, that's another paper that on completion will come in front of the committee.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Councillor Cuthbert.
Just to say thank you very much for that. Sounds good.
Thank you. Last question from Councillor Duff, please.
Thanks, Convener. My question's on page 48 of our pack, which I think is page 22 of the review of 24-25. And there's a paragraph in there that talks about persistent absence. I was quite shocked, I think, to see that 43.1% of our secondary pupils have a persistent absence marker, if you want to put it that way, which means that they've been absent for at least 19 full days in the school term. I just wondered, what do we do to follow up on absences these days, and how are we going to try and reduce that statistic within the 25-26 school year?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to ask Fiona Mackay to give us a detailed answer, perhaps in conjunction with another colleague, Susie Turner, because it's work that they've been leading on. But before I do, I just want to actually acknowledge that, you know, absence and attendance is one of our wicked issues. It's a wicked issue nationally, and it's a particular issue here in Perth and Kinross for us. And probably what we share with the national picture, it's a particularly wicked issue in our secondary landscape. So there's been work ongoing round about that, and there's other work planned, but I'll pass on to Fiona and Susie.
This time last year, we published some new guidance around our attendance processes, so that they had come up to date in terms of reflecting what we'd learned through the COVID experiences, through the support that was provided to get children back into school following that. So we have a staged intervention framework that supports schools to be able to follow a process in terms of communicating, engaging with families to look at the why children are not at school. I think that we would all recognise that to achieve change, we need to work together with families to actually resolve some of that and to understand what the problems are. To help to take that further forward, we also have a number of projects that are in place that kick in at different points. So we have staff within schools like community link workers and community learning assistants who will provide support that is directed by the school to be able to engage. Schools also have a mechanism that they can use to engage with partners such as youth workers and social work and third sector organisations, and that's their integrated team meetings. So they have those in place for every secondary school, and many of our bigger primary schools have access and engage with those. We're currently reviewing that guidance as well, because we recognise that there's a range of changes within the structure of other public services as well, in terms of being able to do that. But other that helps to be able to access some of our other key supports, such as school nurses, because health will be a big part in terms of taking some of that forward. Susie has been more involved in looking at some of the really persistent need that we have within our community, so I'll hand over to her to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. Yeah, and that has been particularly the sustained emotionally based absence project, which we are currently relaunching, having evaluated it and received a new level of community mental health fund support for that, and it will be more locally based and based on supporting relationships with the family on quite a comprehensive and sustained and intensive and long-term basis, which has been part of our learning. We've also got the Connecting Families project mentioned there. And something that isn't mentioned in this is we were able to support the YMCA in a bid for a mentoring project. They've been successful in that, and that's a project that will launch over the next month or two, and will have a particular focus on mentoring for employability. So we're pleased about that. There is something for us in bringing all of these projects together and continuing, as David has said, to see this as an area for ongoing improvement, including the looking outwards, which we've been talking about, because it's a national difficulty that we all continue to work on. So we've also been pleased to be supported by Education Scotland on the National Improvement Project, and 5 of our secondary schools have been taking part in that, and we're looking to evaluate that and to spread the learning from that over the next couple of terms.
Thank you both. Thank you, Councillor Duff. I think that brings an end to our questions. Some really good questions, if you don't mind me saying, from elected members, and that's engendered some really good discussion there. So thank you, everybody. And I think because of that, and moving the paper, I'm not really going to dwell on it other than to say that I think there is a lot of good work already going on in our schools. The Education Improvement Plan seeks to build on that, but I think the Education Improvement Plan also recognises where there are things that are needed improving, and it looks to recognise that and act accordingly. So I'm happy to move this paper, and I'm going to ask Councillor Frampton to second it, please.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Frampton. Comments, please. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, convener. All in all, I think it's a really good report. I actually quite like the format of it. The kind of look back and look forward format I found really helpful. And there's a lot of really good practice highlighted, and you know, where we're aiming to do better. One of the areas that I did want to pick up on, and Councillor Cuthbert kind of beat me to it a wee bit, was about the focus on digital learning. And the talk about ensuring all settings have devices and all the rest of it. And my innocuous question about what happens to this report is, I hope the Scottish Government do read these reports and see what we are doing with our limited resources, because back at the last Scottish Parliament election, they promised in the manifesto commitment that every child would have access to a device, access to the internet, and understanding of how to use their devices, and that's clearly not been met, and we're a year out. So that was why I was asking with a plea that they perhaps have a look at what we're having to do with our very stretched resources to enable children to be ready for the future that we know is going to be very digitally focused. But that point aside, it's a very good report and something that's very useful for us in going back to reference where we've been and where we're going. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Shires. Me too, and I think the digital strategy will be really important moving forward. If there are no more comments, can we agree the paper? Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to paper 5, which I think is a really exciting one. Additional support needs special education provision phase 2 ISP expansion options appraisal. And I'll need a drink of water after that. Fiona, I think you're going to introduce it, please. Sorry, David's going to introduce it, Michael.
Thanks, convener. So the public engagement phase of the statutory consultations and the permanent establishment of intensive support provisions in Perth and Kinross High Schools and Viewlands Primary School, Perth High School, Kinross High School and Viewlands Primary School have now reached the final stages, and that will conclude phase 1 of the intensive support provisions expansion programme, and those papers will come back here to committee in November. This report presents the options appraisal of schools considered for phase 2 of the programme, which seeks to establish permanent intensive support provisions for primary and secondary stages in the catchments of the Community School of Auchterarder and St John's RC Academy. It recommends that statutory consultations are taken forward to consider the preferred option of an intensive support provision providing both primary and secondary education being established at each of the all-through schools in the Community School of Auchterarder and St John's RC Academy catchments. If agreed, these statutory consultations will commence following the 2025 October school break. And once again, a range of officers are here to answer any questions that you have on that.
Thank you, David. Questions from elected members, please. Billy Hearn.
Thank you very much. And I agree, it is an exciting paper. I've really looked forward to it, and I look forward to the third phase as well. But with regards to this phase, and the St John's Academy is a faith-based ISP provision. It doesn't say in here how big that's going to be, and being the only faith-based provision in Perth and Kinross, it's going to attract quite a wide amount of people to go there. How would you allocate the spaces to it, and does it follow the same placing requests? I mean, do the figures for an ISP go on the whole school numbers in regards to placing requests, or does it have a separate placing request allocation in terms of allocating from outside of the catchment area? Because obviously there's no catchment area for St John's. So I'm just interested how that's going to be allocated in terms of numbers and how big it's going to be.
I think that's a really interesting question, because it's kind of new to us all, if you like. So I think it is an interesting question. I think it's a nice problem to have, because whatever happens, we're going to have more provision than we've currently got. But I do take that point that how do we actually deliver it in practice a real exciting
I
place.
suppose it goes outside of just St John's, because
it does.
the likes of Octorada will cover a wide area as well. So is it going to have separate, or are all of the provisions, even the ones that are being currently done now, going to have a separate allocations?
Yeah. Fiona, please.
So allocations to ISPs all come through the transition panel. Transition panel is a panel that Susie chairs and takes account of the assessment of need, because all children need to have a full assessment to ensure that we are not taking away somebody's right to the presumption of mainstream that we would want to preserve wherever possible. So that assessment of whether or not ISP level education happens at a central point. As we move forward and we're looking to have a wider range of ISPs, we're looking to be able to develop that model so that some of the decision making happens at a more localised level, so that we'll be able to do it, although it will still have to retain that element where it is overseen by educational psychology to ensure that we maintain the rigour of assessment. In terms of St John's Academy particularly, we have looked at that and considered how do we work that within the very specific, meeting the very specific criteria for allocation of placements in there, and have already had some early discussions with church colleagues in terms of that, and recognise that that first assessment around the level of need required by the child has to be the main factor in there. But once that is met, if a family put in a placing request, it would be undertaken after that point on the same criteria as the school is. So whether there's a number of different steps that give people greater weight, and suppose in terms of that placing request. I think it's probably important to say, though, that the majority of children who are in our ISPs are not there because of placing requests. So on the whole, it's because a school has brought forward a young person in conjunction with discussion with their parents to be assessed as whether they require additional enhanced intensive support. So for the majority of children, they're there because we've placed them in that particular ISP, taking account of where they're from geographically, and in the respect of the St John's ISP, it'll be within taking account of the views and wishes of the parents. So we would still probably end up placing the majority of children through the panel rather than as a result of a placing request, but we would always be open to taking placing requests as well. In respect of the whether there are enough places within it. So at the moment it's scoped out, Sarah, as 2 classes, one for primary, one for secondary. That would be with 8 children in each. But we will always keep under close review whether that's sufficient as to the requirements.
Thank you, Fiona. Thanks, Billy. And I mean, I do think we probably all agree that the needs of the child here must be paramount, regardless of anything else. Councillor Kigali, please.
Thanks. I was wondering whether we could have a bit more detail on the assumptions and figures that sit behind the statement that reduced travel, will offset future inflationary pressures. It mentions some modelling, but doesn't really go into a huge amount more depth than that. I was just wondering whether you had any more detail.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask Fiona to have a wee bit comment on that. I think it's important, though, to state that the intentions of ISP expansion are very much not around economic factors. I don't think that's what you're suggesting anyway. It is about the needs of the child. But Fiona.
You're absolutely right. It is about the needs of the children, and particularly about them not having to travel out with their local community. We do anticipate that that will have an impact on transport, so both in terms of the miles that a child has to travel, but also in being able to, more children being able to either be able to access the ISP directly from their home, or have a much shorter transition in transport vehicles. And having shorter transport distances to travel may allow us to have more involvement or be able to include children more in the standard school transport, because we're not talking about them having to travel potentially 20 or 30 miles to get to their school. It would hopefully be within a very reasonable distance. We are not the allocation of home to school transport obviously follows the addresses of the children that are involved. So it's very difficult to be really tight in terms of the savings that there will be, because we may still require, if a child's over the statutory limit for transport, we would still have to be able to provide that resource. And with children growing up and moving on and new children coming into the system, we don't always know where that is their addresses are most likely to be. So we can't be hard and fast in terms of what the savings would be, but we would say that overall we would perceive that we would have some savings in that less children are going to have to travel significant distances to access their education.
Thank you, Fiona. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, my question is about Kinrossha. I understand that's a later phase. It's not in here. I really welcome this coming forward, and I think it's great to see them arriving. But I'm just trying to get a timeline for when we might see that in Kinrossha. I understand primary school kids are being taken to Errol at the moment, which is a pretty lengthy and expensive journey. So I'm just wondering when Kinrossha is going to see something.
Fiona, please. Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert, by the way. It's a good question.
So we are continuing to work with the two main biggest schools within that area to look at what the availability of space is and what we would be looking to take forward. Because of the capacity of both schools, then we are working with our property colleagues in terms of taking forward feasibility of what that might look like. They haven't had the opportunity yet because they have been concentrating on the establishment of the three ISPs that are opened in August this year. They had a biggest focus on that. But what we do know is that for the next phase, where we're looking at Auchterarder and St John's, that the building work that's involved in that is absolutely minimal. So in terms of that, frees up their capacity to have a greater focus then on the Kinrossha development. The other school that we are looking at within phase 3 was the Bertha Park primary catchment. Again, there isn't a lot of building development work that needs to happen in respect of that, because we have a template, if you like, for taking that forward. So our focus from here will be on the Kinrossha area.
Thank you. There are no more questions, so I'm going to move the report, and I really welcome this report. And the reason why we are doing intensive support provision expansion is about keeping our young children who are most deserving of our support in their communities, so they're with their siblings, so they're with their friends, and so they're able to be part of that community in which they live. And this phase 2 allows us to do that in Strathallan and North Perth, and it also allows a faith-based option as well. I think the through school nature of these options is really important too, particularly around transition. And I think we can all be really proud of this project as a whole. I think these 4 new ISPs reflect our commitment to that. And we do now concentrate on Kinrossha. I think it is really important. I know that local members, Councillor Cuthbert and indeed Councillor Waters behind the scenes will make sure that it doesn't fall off the radar, and quite right too. But none of this work has been easy, though. I think it has to be said, and I think our officers here genuinely deserve commendation here. It's not been easy, particularly when you're trying to do this, but also to make sure there's no detriment to the mainstream activities of the school. That is not easy, and I think I just want to say genuinely thank you from everybody here. I think this has been really superb work so far. I think, and it will continue to be good work. I think we're making the lives of some of our young people better because of it, and I am really proud, actually, on behalf of us all, to move this paper, and I'm going to ask Councillor Frampton to second it.
Thank you. I just echo everything that Councillor Repick has said there and express our thanks as well for all the work that goes on behind the scenes. And I'm happy to formally second the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Frampton. Provost, please comment.
Thank you, Convener. And I want to echo something that you said in your moving remarks around the fact I think it's a really positive thing that this is an all through in both cases, actually. I think that helps with, as somebody who attended 2 all through schools, the actual community that provides, but also the transition, the smoother transition, and particularly we know that people who young people who might be accessing these provisions will maybe struggle more with transition than others, and actually this will help with that. So I think it's a really positive thing in both cases, and it is good both from a geographic point of view, but also that faith opportunity. So I'm very supportive of the recommendations, and I think it's something that we should be proud of, that this is something we are continuing to expand in this way.
Just like to add my thanks to Fiona and Sarah and the team for all the work that's been done over the summer, especially to address the concerns of parents that you referred to of mainstream children about the phase 1 work that's going ahead. And we look forward to progressing to the report on that at this committee in November. Thank you for that assurance, David.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett-Baileyhan.
Yes, and thank you for allowing me to comment. As you're well aware, I have a huge interest in ASN, and I think this work is great. The phasing is good as well. We learn lessons as we move forward. We took a visit out to the ISP provision at Crieff High School, which I think was an excellent visit. I learned a lot from that as well. We talk a lot about mainstream. I see it as an enhancement to mainstream education when you're actually in those schools where pupils access the ISP, but from the ISP to the mainstream for some lessons, and equally the other way around as well. You get pupils from mainstream accessing the ISPs to see what's going on and support the pupils going through that as well. I certainly support option 3 through care from all the way through from primary to secondary. Excellent report, and I look forward to hearing the end of phase 3 and the successes we've had from the whole programme moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks for those kind comments, Baileyhan. And I think the point you make about ISP and mainstream not being separate is a point well made, and one that we should bear in mind. I'll be happy to agree with the report. Thank you very much. We move on to item 6, which is our accessibility strategy and action plan for 25 to 28. And I think Fiona is introducing this one. Sorry, so that's 2 out of 3 I've got wrong there. So apologies for that, David. With apology.
Fired up with my stuff in front of me, I better carry on. So yeah, thank you very much, Convener. So the purpose of this report is to request approval of the Accessibility Strategy and Action Plan 2025 to 2028. So this delivers on the duty of the Education Authority in relation to the Education, Disability Strategies and Pupils' Educational Records Scotland Act 2002. The Strategy and Action Plan attached as an appendix to the report includes a summary of the outcomes and output delivered through the previous iteration of the strategy. This includes works by schools to improve their environments, develop universal supports, improve their communication environments and train staff. New strategy and action plan, which will be delivered over the next 3 years, will build on the progress made following the previous iteration of the strategy, and it will support delivery of additional support needs transformation programme and improve inclusion across all of our early learning and childcare settings in schools. And I guess that's the thing about this, it might come from a place that seems a bit dry in terms of coming from statute, but it should be an important living, breathing part of who we are here in our education provision in Perth and Kinross. We're joined by a number of officers here who will be able to answer questions more detailed, more fully than I, including the authors of the report, Jen McNichol and Fiona Mackay.
Thanks, David. Questions from elected members, please, if any. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. My question's in the appendix, page 14, and it's how do we measure success? And I was just wondering if we could tease that couple of paragraphs out, because I suspect this is subtle as it is complex, and we are going to be have monitoring reports that are going to be collated each year. So I was just wondering if that is accredited sort of monitoring, or is it just PKC developing their own packages to meet the differing needs of the schools? Thank you.
Thank you. Jen, please.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Stewart. I think in looking at the report of the previous 3 years' work that's been done, there's a real sense of what has been done, and in reviewing and designing the plan going forward for the next 3 years, we're really keen to make sure that that lens on measurement of success is very much moving from what has been done, what has been delivered, and how many people have engaged or participated in work, to what is the impact on the children, young people and their families, who this piece of statute is charging us to make improvements in regard to. Looking at some of the work that's been taken forward with regards to Talking Mats training for every primary school to have connection with a teacher who is Talking Mats trained, looking at a programme of rolling out Makaton training and making sure that we have as wide an opportunity to communicate with our children, young people and their families through the formats and methods that are preferable to them. We will be able to get direct impact measures from them and hear the voice of our own children and community around about them. Within the first year of this new plan, the idea would be, or the plan then would be, to use that feedback from children and young people as a baseline measure from which to then quarterly, as we're reporting to education and learning senior management teams, to be reporting on the progress as we're hearing it both from practitioners around impact and change of practice, and there will be triangulation in respect to the quality improvement reviews that happen within schools and the work that quality improvement officers are seeing happening. And indeed, during those improvement reviews, there are focus groups with children and young people. It will be important that we are then making sure we're not just hearing from children and young people who communicate in the same way that we might be comfortable, but that we're opening as many channels as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. And still sticking with the measures of success, we're going to be having annual monitoring reports, and then we're going to have a final review in 28. And I was wondering what the difference between the annual monitoring reports and the final review report will be.
Fiona?
The importance, I think, is that we're looking at the progress over time, so that we're not just waiting for 3 years and then bringing back a report to you that might then seem very out of date. So the monitoring reports are mini reviews, if you like, towards progress.
Thank you for that good question, Councillor Stewart, and thank you for the comprehensive answers. Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you. I really welcome this report. It's got lots of good stuff, as you say, recognising what's been done and what is going to be done. Could I just ask that it's tidied up a bit? There are cross references that are wrong and there are typos, and especially the table at the back with the actions is really difficult to follow because things aren't aligned. So if that could be sorted, that would be great. Thank you.
No worries, Councillor Barrett. We'll see that we can tidy up the admin. Thank you. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, convener. It's all quite fresh in mind because Councillor Barrett and I'm not sure if others were at Reach this morning and had the chance to talk to the speech and language professionals that work embedded within that team, and the work around the Talking Mats, etc., which we were had demonstration of. In the report, it refers to the partnership working with the NHS and third sector being crucial to success of this. Now we know about the pressures that are on the NHS and length of waits, etc., for assessment. And whilst at Reach, clearly there's real rapid success delivered by that early intervention. But if we're relying on interventions from the NHS and third sector, does that then delay the really good work that's highlighted in the report that our officers and staff do? It's just to get some clarification because I can see a bottleneck potentially there.
Yeah, and I think that is always a real concern for us, isn't it? You know, your partnership work is really it's tricky, you know, to get everybody aligned in the same place, in the same page. But it's absolutely crucial because this is success that we will not be able to generate on our own. So we need those partners. I think what would be good would be if I asked Fiona to talk about some of the work that we have done with NHS roundabout speech and language as a kind of living example of that work.
Yes, so we have recently produced a new contract that we're just finalising with NHS at the moment. A lot of that will focus in on training and support for staff and using really engaging models so that there's coaching. It's not just about delivery of one-off training that then sometimes staff can struggle to embed because it's alien to their practice in situ. So the models that we use in terms of how we work with our partners are evolving significantly as well. So another example of where we would be doing that is we're engaging in some training with Perth Autism Support with looking at the whole school community around the Community School of Auchterarder, where they're looking at training up all members of staff within the school over a year basis. So is it a year or 2 years? 2-year basis. So we recognise that there are a large number of staff, but also that they need time to take information away, put it into practice, then come back and have further conversations and discussions. And I suppose that in terms of how that is going to really strengthen practice and hopefully also reduce demand on some of our other services, because we have staff who are more skilled in terms of being able to take forward interventions themselves, as opposed to have to rely on bringing in partner agencies who, rightly so, you highlighted, can be quite stretched. The other model is in terms of our train the trainer focus. So with Talking Mats and with Makaton, we're looking at train the trainer, looking at skilling up some of our teaching staff around BSL, British Sign Language, and Braille as well. So, you know, a number of different approaches that might support communication and engagement going forward. We're looking to embed within the staff teams that we have, as opposed to looking outward for other inputs.
Thank you very much. I was unable to visit Reach this morning because of award-specific briefings, so thanks to those members that attended. But I think our accessibility strategy is important in making sure that our kids are resilient, engaged, achieving, confident and healthy. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. I was really going to ask about Duty 2, which is all pupils with disabilities are able to access education in a setting which supports their learning by meeting their physical needs. I've spoken about this in the workshops and so on. My own view is that we need to go much further than just being physically capable of getting in a building. My view is that schools should be a place where kids are comfortable with being where they want to go, and we should be doing a lot of work on the lighting, the noise absorption around the building, soft play areas, quiet areas, so that people actually feel comfortable in the environment. I'm thinking particularly about secondary school, but it does apply to primary as well. And it's this question of how we make schools a place where the kids want to be. And that might help address some of our problems with attendance. I'm just wondering what work is going on in that area.
I think that, again, it's just a really good point, Councillor Cuthbert. David, please.
Yeah, and again, it is a good point. And that point about making school a place where young people and children want to be is crucial and key. And that actually, that sums up the totality of the curriculum that we're trying to provide. Curriculum being the whole experience from walking in the door and then walking out the door, and indeed what follows you home as well. So the environment's a key part of that. You know, I think there are ongoing challenges round about some of our buildings as we wrestle with our multifaceted school estate. I think you can see in some of the newer build that we have in Perth and Coonross that we've created a variety of different learning environments suited to those diverse needs. I think, you know, at a new school at Perth High, the lighting issue, which is one we've discussed before, Councillor Cuthbert, you'll see that that's a far more natural light source that's provided across that school, so that we're less reliant on the flicker of overhead lights as one example. The learning environment that we have at Riverside Primary is another one that if elected members have visited, you'll see that there is you know, that there's been real thought into the learning environment for the full range of children and young people's needs who attend there. And every school is trying to do that in their own way with the resources that we have. I think that's an ongoing discussion, an ongoing piece of work with all of our schools. You know, on top of sometimes the things that arrive, if there's a heavy burst of rain, where property colleagues are then diverted to that. But it's not something that we'll let go of. And I know that it's something that Fiona and her team are specifically focused on in terms of that, a bit of a universal support for all children and young people moving ahead. So there is there is a bit of diversity because of, you know, when schools were constructed and built, that makes it easier for our new builds. But that's what we need to do to kind of make sure that if in essence we can retrofit all of our schools to meet the needs of all. So yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
If I can just come back on that, in principle, I think it needs to be incorporated in the strategy in that case, in fairly basic terms, so that it's an aspiration, but I think it should be in here stating what we're trying to do.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to look at that, Councillor Cuthbert, if that's okay. If there are no more questions, in moving the report, I think all I'm going to say is that if we're really serious about delivering equity inclusion, we need a credible accessibility strategy. So I welcome this report and I'm happy to move it. Councillor Frampton.
Happy to second.
Thank you very much. Comments, please, members? Or are we happy just to move the report, agree the report? Thank you very much. Thanks for everyone's attendance today and everybody's good question and positive comments where they were. Thank you.